let your engineers experiment a little bit, right? So like an old saying, which is like, if you don't give engineers good problems, they create problems. Prototyping engineers are always going to have work, right? Because like if you can make something cool, then that's honestly a job in and of itself.
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.
A month ago, Andrew Pignanelli launched Co-Founder, and the launch took the internet by storm. He calls it the first AI agent that runs your business with you. Not just another chatbot or automation tool, but an AI chief of staff for your company. In this conversation, Andrew unpacks what it takes to build memory into machines, how you teach an agent to understand your company, habits, and intent, and why context might be the missing piece between useful tools and truly autonomous systems. He talks about knowledge graphs, long-term memory, and what Andrew calls context engineering, the art of giving AI the right information at the right time. And then we zoom out to something even bigger. What happens when that memory compounds, and one person with an intelligent partner can run an entire company alone? If you care about where AI work is headed, this episode's for you. Enjoy the conversation.
Andrew, well, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Super excited to chat with you. So before we kick off, before we dig into things, would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about where you've been and what you're working on today.
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Pignanelli. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the General Intelligence Company of New York. It's quite a long name, but it's very impressive when you read it aloud. And we started the company about 6.5 months ago. It was me and my co-founder, Avi. And our goal was to build this infrastructure or build a platform for the one-person billion-dollar company. What that has actually looked like is we've built this platform called Co-Founder, which is this sort of AI chief of staff, and saw a lot of really good reception to it. The concept for it originally came about from an article that I wrote back in 2021, which was using Discord as like a command line for a company. And I figured if you plug into a bunch of these different APIs, you can actually like run commands that would do things for the company. So the concept was if you type /fire, you could fire someone in real life. And I was like between companies. My previous company was called Velvet, and we were doing RAG systems and like document retrieval for private equity and finance. And I got bought out from that like about 1.5 years ago, and I was looking for what was next. And I read this article that I had previously written and was like, oh, I think you can do that with agents nowadays and make it actually work. And then that kind of spiraled into this whole, oh, well, people are talking about this one-person billion-dollar company. If you take this command line and you put an agent on top, then you have something really cool. And that was our initial concept. And that was like our initial demo. So I met my co-founder. We started working on a demo. And then in March, we were like, this thing has legs. This is really cool. And then we started working.
Nice. And where are you guys at today? I saw there was a fundraising announcement that went out on your company account a few days ago. But what stage is the business in, and where are you at today?
Yeah, so we launched our product Co-Founder about a month ago, and we saw quite a bit of success there. Like that was kind of our big public launch. Back in March, we raised a small pre-seed of $2 million, and used that to build the team and get an office and everything, and actually start building this product. Basically, 5 months later, we launched it to the world in a much more complete state than we thought we would. And then the thing that surprised us about the launch, it wasn't going viral. We knew it would go viral. It was that people liked the product. That's the thing that we couldn't anticipate beforehand. And so we started seeing all this, and it was like, all right, we gotta take advantage of this and keep pushing it. And so we then went out and fundraised. We haven't actually announced it yet. Someone leaked a fundraise for us. So I can't comment publicly on this, but there will be an announcement soon that does mention it. But we've been very busy in the last 4 weeks, for sure.
Very exciting. And let's maybe dig into co-founder a little bit more. So can you describe co-found in a bit more detail, and also some examples, other examples of how folks might use it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So first of all, going to co-founder, we have made it so that it's like this assistant that knows you. I think the biggest difference between co-founder and something that you might see anywhere else is that we've put a lot of work into the memory system, and we put a lot of work into preferences and things like that take it beyond, oh, it's just connecting to a tool and doing a thing. We started from this idea of like, well, how would you work with someone on your staff? How would you work with a person to actually do something? And the biggest difference we saw versus what was in the world was, well, if you run some command with like instructions, then it will do exactly what you tell it to do. But if you tell someone on your team to go get something done, they'll actually make it work for the business, and they'll take in all this context. They'll know what you're doing right now. They'll know where you're trying to go. They'll know the right people to talk to and the right people to ask. And we didn't see anything like that. And so when we were building Co-Founder, it was like, it needs to know you. And so we put weeks of work into the system to collect info on you. When you sign up, you have to connect your email, you have to connect your calendar. We don't let people sign up without doing that, because we need to start building this picture of the business and the person. And so it goes through and collects all of this info on you and builds a knowledge base and sort of a memory. And then when you're using it, it uses those things to actually accomplish the tasks. We've also combined that with like a state-of-the-art agent that will run for a very long time and will be able to, use a computer, use the internet, things like that. And so you can use it for really complicated tasks, but then those tasks will actually know you. So an example, right? A very simple example is an email. And we wrote a blog post about a month and a half ago titled like "Memory is the Last Step to AGI." And the first sentence of this blog post is, if you want to make a good email assistant, you have to first create AGI. And that's because it doesn't know anything about you. If you want to respond to an email like an executive, the emails that I respond to as CEO are like, oh, get the accounting statements, and what's the cap table look like? And are you hiring this person? It's an interview with a new person you're hiring. All these different things are tremendously complex once you go beyond the surface level. And you can't just take how someone writes an email and like the style and make it work. You have to combine that with this memory on the business. And so, this is a use case that people use Co-Founder for, is actually writing emails, because it knows everything about what you're trying to do and the people you're talking to and where your business is at. How people are using Co-Founder today goes into probably two different categories. We call it like personal work and then like teamwork. So personal work is whatever you're doing for like your side project or like your singular self, and like it's work that you're doing. So book me a trip, or get me this document online or something like that, or like apply 2 jobs with my resume. And then we're seeing teamwork, which is like teams working together, and it's in Slack, and it's actually helping with projects. And it's like, oh, create this bug report, pull my data from Posthog, and then assign it to Devin to actually code a solution. Right? These are kind of more complicated use cases that I see people using it for. And then we've got the web monitoring system, which lets you just send agents across the internet and monitor websites for you. So those are kind of the 3 things that we're seeing people use it for every day.
Yeah, I did get a chance to read the blog post and really, really liked that first sentence. I thought it was a really catchy opening to the blog. I'm curious, like, what makes memory so difficult, and how do you get enough context to be able to make it work effectively?
Yeah. So what makes memory difficult is the context engineering, which is this new term that's come about over the last 6 months on, how do you get the right info into a language model and then have it operate, get it out. And everything is based on, different complexity levels of this. And when you're running an agent that is very capable and it's running tools and stuff like that, you can't just put everyone's info into like the system prompt to let the agent work. It's this big engineering challenge of like, okay, how do you slot the right like 5,000 words about a person in to totally work on their task, right? Because you also need an additional like 20,000 words for it to be actually like reading the stuff it searches from the internet and running the task and things like that. And so it's this huge engineering problem. And there have been a lot of methods to solve it. Like the first one was like RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, right? Which basically means you have some system that pulls from a long series of documents and then gives like a small chunk of it to your language model so that it can start to work, right? Evolutions of that get very, very complicated. And so the thing that came about this year is these things called knowledge graphs, which is this, you have your entire life in a huge chunk of text that's like, let's say 10 million tokens long or 10 million word long. And you have an agent that goes and reads it and builds a graph of like all the people in your life and the business in your life and what you actually do and all your emails. And it's basically making like a structure on this stuff, kind of how you think about things, right? So everything's relationship based. So this knowledge graph, me and you would be connected via this podcast. So it would be, me as a node and you, and then in the middle, our relationship is this podcast. And like if you take that, you scale it up to everything you've ever done, it becomes an even more complicated problem. And so the reason memory is difficult is you combine this with like a search function and an agent itself. And you say, okay, well, how do I turn this huge graph into like 20 paragraphs that I can use to solve your problem? And then give it to the language model and give it to the agent. And that is the engineering issue, is like, which 20 paragraphs are those? How do you get them? How do you solve for when they're wrong? How do you let the agent retry if it knows they're wrong? But how does it even know they're wrong in the first place? And then for us, which our users who signed up right after our launch will have noticed, is the infrastructure behind all of this is pretty complicated too. And all of it blew up like the minute we launched. So these are problems that we were solving over the last 6 months, and we still haven't solved all the way. Nobody solved them all the way. But like the email example is one where if you take all of the info on my business and try to distill it into like the right 20 paragraphs for how do I respond to your email inviting me to a podcast, that's an example of like, how would you even do that? And that's why memory is so hard.
So I know knowledge graphs have been around for some time, but they're having a moment right now. Is this still a very much like an unsolved challenge? Figuring out how to retrieve the right context from a knowledge graph, being able to parse this ontology in an effective way based on the type of query that comes in, or are there some emerging best practices that you're starting to see?
Yeah, so there have been quite a few improvements over the last like 12 months for this stuff. I think the biggest one is context windows went up by about 10x in the last like 18 months, I guess. And that allows you to make the chunk of documents that are given to the agent bigger. And that does solve problems on its own, but I wouldn't call it a solved problem because the best systems still only get about 70%. And our system gets that. In order to get higher, you have to start running, searches more times, and that takes up more tokens and things like that. That's about where we're at right now. Some of the things that have come about over the last 12 months is combining different search methods together before showing the context to the agent. So one example is like classic RAG, where you're just sort of doing a search that that matches your query to like a topic, combining that with another search, which searches this graph, and then giving those combined results to the agent. That's something that people have started doing much more often. Costs have gone down to a level where you can do this at a much higher scale. So like, for example, we process 20 billion tokens a week, and we're spending for our knowledge agent, we're spending like $1,000, $2,000 on that. So that's very doable versus a year ago where it would have been 10 times higher. Another thing that we're seeing is this notion of what's called sleep time compute. And sleep time compute basically means that you have an agent that is not your main agent. It just sits in the background and like works on this knowledge. And that's all it does. It just like reads new emails that you get. It reads new Slack messages. It reads new linear issues, new code, and like writes changes to this knowledge graph. That's something that I believe Letta really invented. And I think their article came out like a year ago. But that's become very common, which is having a sleep time agent. That's one of the things that we use as well. What's interesting is like the embeddings models, which you use for just like semantic search and like similarity between things. They haven't really gotten better. They haven't gotten better in the last like 2 or 3 years. They're like such an interesting place where progress has stopped almost entirely. And so you see these massive strides coming forward in retrieval, and then embeddings is just the same. But the biggest thing has changed how everything is done. And if you use Cursor, you'll notice it is what's called agentic search, which is basically giving an agent tools and then letting it see if the thing that it searched for is the right thing to use, and then letting it search again if it doesn't. So in Cursor, a good example is like, if you tell it about a file, it will run a search, and then, maybe it gets the file, maybe it doesn't. Then it will run a search again until it gets the file. Sometimes it'll run like 20 searches. I know a lot of people have like posted this online. They're like, why is my Cursor running 20 searches? Because the agent is literally just reading it and being like, oh, this isn't right. I need more info. And then reading it again. And that's been the big change. In the last 12 months, right? Agents like barely even worked a year ago. Now they work really well. And that's improved retrieval significantly. Like you can get if you have an agent retrieval system, you can get it close to like 99% retrieval accuracy. And that just wasn't possible before. And so like in my memory article, I made a meme, which is like Sonnet 4 plus grep search equals ABI. And that's what it kind of feels like, is like you can have an almost perfect memory system. The only downside is it's really, really inefficient. And so like you can't use it for everything. Yeah, it just takes a bunch of tokens, right? Because if you have all of your context, you put it into the agent and then it's wrong, then you have to pay for all of that and then run it again, right? And so in Cursor, if you have like 30 searches, you're already, using up half a context window, and that's already a couple dollars.
I see. Are there any tools that are emerging for agentic search or agentic RAG that are popular, or people just stitching together their, a vector database and a foundation model and all of the sort of components to build it themselves nowadays?
Honestly, there's a difference between like people making demos and production. Everyone is doing it themselves in production, but it is quite a bit faster than it used to be, right? So you get a vector database, you get some functions together. Like you can use these abstractions like LangChain or something. And it's pretty quick to make it. Everyone I know operating in production, though, is doing it themselves. And it's because it is pretty complicated to do the infrastructure. And it's like, it's a problem that seems simple when you think about it the first time. And then like you're still working on it 4 weeks later. And you're really suicidal. And you're like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I want to take a step back, Andrew, and talk a little bit more about just like the vision that the general intelligence company has laid out to the world. So why was it important for you to take a big swing here, to paint this picture of a world where somebody is able to run a billion-dollar startup themselves using AI? And I'm just curious how that's resonated with different types of folks.
Yeah. So we decided very early on that we would be a vision first company. You can have a company and you can decide how to make it in any way. And there are companies that are very clearly like revenue first. There are companies that are, clearly like people first, where they just want it to be a lifestyle business forever. That we decided, the world's going to look like this. We're going to be able to go after it. We're going to build that. And why we did that was the very early days of the company that this conversation started coming about, the $1 billion company, right? And it started to seem like an inevitability. And this direction the world was moving very quickly was an interesting one. And so for me personally, I was like, I want anyone to be able to start a company, and enabling that is huge. And if the wrong person is going after this, it's still not going to be anyone. It's going to be the same people just starting more companies. And you can see this in our marketing and our collateral and everything. It really is like, I want anyone to be able to do this. And every time you take that up a level and you start thinking about it more, you just start wanting to do it more, and you want to be more successful. So, if you walk around a park in New York and you asked anyone at the park if they wanted to start a company, they would say yes. And it would give you an idea, a specific idea on the company that they're thinking about starting right now. And then you ask them why you won't do it. They're like, well, it's too hard on this side, or like, I don't know how to do the marketing, or I don't know how to write code. And this whole world of people are locked out of this ability to start a company. They have an edge. They know something that everybody else doesn't. They know how to make whatever you're thinking about in the company, but they don't know some of the edges. And imagine if you could get every one of them to actually do it. And imagine you can make it so easy. You can start it in a day, a real company, not some AI shitty slop company, right? A real company in a day. Imagine the GDP you get out of the world, and imagine how much better you can make these people's lives. And so that's why we started it. And we realized as well that however you do that, there's all these really interesting problems along the way, right? Like if you go in that direction, you can work on the most interesting agents in the world. And, a bit selfishly, I wanted to start a company to work on really interesting agents because I knew I could make agents, and I knew that was the next thing. But, if you fail on your ultimate vision for this, you still end up in a really great spot, and you're still working on some of the hardest problems in the world. And so all of those were very great reasons to start the company. And it really does resonate with people, right? Like there's this idea that AI is bad that a lot of the world sees right now. And there are very fair reasons for them to say that, right? Like a lot of these everyday people are very scared of AI, and they should be. It is our position that AI is going to take a ton of jobs, but it's also our position that, well, a great avenue for people to go would be to start a company and get actual ownership, right? And like start doing something themselves. And so that resonates with people. I will say there is like, a little bit of constant, I hate this. I hate all AI companies. You live in New York, so do I. We saw the friend posters. But it's a pretty low minority of people who really, really like are against AI entirely. And yeah, I mean, it's resonated a lot with the startup world, right? Like there's a lot of people that can vibe code an app. And our thing is, well, now you can turn it into an actual business, and you can work on the other side too. And like that's resonated super well. And yeah, it's a huge swing. We also figured when we started the company, before we had anything, any money, any resources, any demo, before we were written like any code, we figured we would take a really big swing and we would be vision first because, well, if you take a vision that's this big and then you start convincing smart people to believe in it, and you can get resources and you can get really smart people to work for you. Like, I think it's much easier for me to convince a researcher or like one of the top designers in the world, or, some of the top software engineers in the world from the best companies to come work here. Much easier for us than someone making classic B2B enterprise vertical SaaS? Like, do you want to be working on know your customer products for some finance company while AGI is coming around? No, you want to be working on this. And that has also been resonating with people too. Every day I'm glad we took this big swing. It's a horizontal company. These are kind of a pain in the ass to raise money for, because people see all the agents in the world and all of the agents companies. And then every time, OpenAI releases a new thing, I get texts from people asking me what we're different about. And it's like, ultimately, what matters is you make an amazing product that solves a problem for people. You have smart people who could do it. And that's what we're doing. And it's working.
I love that. Yeah, I remember hearing a quote many years ago about how building a business that is very ambitious with a big vision is a lot easier than building something incremental, even if the former is harder to generate revenue for earlier on. I'm curious if you envision that businesses that have existed for some time, if they're going to start looking a little bit more like the one person $1 billion startups and how they function, and what the timeline for that might look like. How long do you expect it takes for those businesses to really get down to the bare minimum?
We've talked to a number of larger businesses, and we're actually in pilots with a couple that want to roll out co-founder as this sort of chief of staff for every person in their company. And where it is now is very digestible for everyone. But where it's going is this sort of coordinator management agent, right? So we've built this concept we call super optimizers, which is just agents that manage other agents, or like manager agents, I guess. And no one's really been able to get it right yet. But that's the thing that's going to scare people a bit, is like, if you're at a big four company with 20 levels of management, you start to think about, well, okay, if I can get rid of 5 of these levels, whether it's the top 5 or the bottom 5, what happens what happens next? And that's lots of jobs. And so we're much more focused on, like, you're starting a new company and you can expand very, very widely without hiring more. We're not as focused on, like, we're going to wipe out the management of a company. It's more like, we can do these things for people who are trying to do it on their own much better. Those people don't have any managers to work with, right? They don't get reports that they can make decisions on, and then have them handled by a secretary or a team of 25. They're on their own. And so that's really what we're focused on. And then how this plays out timeline wise, whether it's us or someone else who does these types of agents, we're going to start seeing some serious movement in the next 12 months. Like, I am one of the shortest timeline people I know when it comes to AGI, because my definition of AGI is like basically Samantha from Her, which, if you read the memory essay, you see we're actually not as far away from that as people think, right? Models just have to get a little bit better, memory systems a little bit better. And then we're there. And so if we're there, then organizations start to become a lot more agentic, and you start to see super optimizers in every department. And you see people working alongside agents more than they were working alongside other people. And you see that in organizations that are really straightforward. This thing has happened over the last 12 months. And I've noticed it in startups, and like some of the investors we were talking to were talking about it as well, is like, if you have a company that started like 12 months ago and you compare it to a company that started 2 or 3 years ago, they're totally different. So a company like ours is a great, example to talk about here. Company like ours runs, every one of our developers is running 3 or 4 different agents at a time. But they've got Devin coding something, they've got Cursor running and they're coding with Cursor. They have, 2 instances of those going on. I have a bunch of co-founder instances running marketing stuff and things like that for us. And companies that were started just 2 years ago don't look like that. They still have people doing all the work, sending a bunch of fucking emails and all this different stuff. And they don't actually work as quickly as these types of companies do. And you're seeing like 95+% of code generated, written by agents. You're seeing like more than half of the marketing copy. You're seeing, very fast communication. You're seeing agents all around Slack channels. And larger companies just don't look like that. They still look the same as they did a couple years ago. And so what happens to those companies? They start to lose versus the quick moving incumbents. And you'll see that the very large companies like Google are doing a great job of becoming this way. But there's this like middle where they're totally falling behind. And, you see the MIT study of like 95% of AI pilots fail. I've used the same tools that you've used and a lot of people have used. These things still work. Like they work pretty well. So if a pilot's failing at your company might have something wrong. And the 5% that have them working are going to be much further along.
That's really well said. Without disclosing any trade secrets, of course, I'm curious, this AI native company, if you can elaborate on what that looks like in a bit more detail, what are some other ways that an AI native business uses AI that would look different than a company even started, let's say 3 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use us as an example because it's the one that I know the best. The craziest one is we have always on microphones in our office that write to co-founders' memory.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, we're a little bit wilder than most. So I don't think that's like a common use case, but it's ours. So that we never lose context, right? Like there's this whole thing about if you can create and see all this context, then you can probably operate it with an agent. But yeah, I mean, I do want to quickly comment that like agents, A, they didn't really work until 12 months ago. And B, the only ones that did at the beginning were coding agents, right? But we're starting to see agents working in other departments, right? Like sales agents and these like, these follow-up agents and stuff have started to work. The customer support agents like Decagon, Sierra have started to work. And you're starting to see different agents like code review agents or like, there was one that I saw that would watch sessions of your users and then like, generate feedback on that. And so if you're super forward and you're very risk taking, you can start adopting these agents. Now, I want to say it's really risky to use this many agents in a company because agents don't work 100% of the time, right? They work like at most 95 and most of them maybe more like 90, right? And even the coding agents like Devin, which is, I would say, one of the best in class, or Codex, they're only hitting like 50% maybe in terms of like actual code generated being successful. Now, the nice thing in code is you have instant feedback loops, right? You know if your code works, you can see if it works. It takes half a second. When it comes to a sales agent, it doesn't look the same. And you can have very long cycles that are hard to sort of like audit and see if they're working. And so it's a much more complicated problem. In terms of like more day to day of how you can do that though, like customer support agents are relatively low risk if you have the right guardrails. And you can respond to a bunch of different queries, right? So like one of the main things that customers will ask about is like a refund or a delete my account or something like that. Or they'll give like feedback. And a customer support agent can deal with those three things relatively quick, right? Maybe you have to have a human approving it, but a customer support agent can handle the conversation. User presses a button and it resolves itself, right? And you could leverage your human talent much further than you used to be able to. We currently don't have a customer support agent set up. We are working towards it. We do have sales agents set up. We also have agents for marketing copy and tweets and content. So like we use Co-Founder to pull content from like 40 different sites and then basically make new content out of that, new blog posts, new things. Hiring. We had, this wasn't us, but we had someone look at job applications from 1,000 candidates and used Co-Founder to scrape their GitHubs to see if they wrote in the language that they needed, which is Rust. and they narrowed it down from like 1,000 to like 20, because, someone will say Rust on the resume and then they won't actually have ever written on it. And then it's like, okay, so that's a good way to use an agent that saved like actual hours of time from someone probably. What else? Let's see. We have a really cool one that actually helped us raise our pre-seed round, but it's much more defined now and much more built out, which is whenever a customer gives a piece of feedback in our support email, it is looked at by co-founder. Co-founder pulls the logs from Posthog, which is like support analytics and stuff, and sees what they were doing in the app. And then it calls Devin then it writes a requirements, and then it calls Devin to code up whatever their feedback asked for. And this is a very simple version of like a system that will be much bigger later on. But you're going from, customer support to an actual feature that can be merged into your app with no people involved. And, that's an example of like what we call super optimizers, which is like co-founder can talk to these 3 agents and make a saying in your app that will make your customer better. And so then you could eventually say, increase my customer retention, and then it will work. And like, that's what we're working towards, is systems that are similar to that.
Super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing in such detail. So when you say super optimizer, I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So let me play it back. A super optimizer is a agent that is able to work with other agents in order to execute a more complex workflow. What I mean by that is the super optimizer doesn't necessarily only interact with your own agents at the general intelligence company. It can interact with Devin. It can interact with other agents and other tools. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, in essence, it's just an agent that manages other agents. Right. And like, especially agents that aren't your own. So, if you could replace a manager function in a business, that would be a super optimizer agent. And because, you'll see these like verticals, right, where your customer support agent does customer support, your code agent does code, your product analytics agent analyzes product analytics, right? And it's pretty difficult to just start, working on a firewall goal with a single one of these agents. You can't go to Devin and say, increase my retention. It's not going to work, right? You need a layer on top. You need something that can manage together. And that's really, that's what we're building, right? That's what co-founder is.
That's really interesting. I don't think I've seen anything else like that in the market. So now moving from agents to humans, how do you decide what to hand over to a human versus an agent? What remains a human only type task?
So part of our workflow is handing to an agent first for almost everything and then seeing what it does. And then a human actually reviews the output. So like code is a great example. Like we have Devin take a first pass at everything. And this is obviously a little bit more expensive, but what it does is it makes it so that you're not starting from zero on like any task. There are certain tasks that agents are just bad at right now. So like, anything creative, essentially, that's not very good at. Like writing content for a company blog is one thing. But, writing about a novel vision for the world is another. And you can't really get an agent to do that. Not right now, at least. Maybe in the future, or like the artwork that we make for our website and our posters and things. You can't really have an agent do. Or obviously meetings, right? Meetings have to be done with people. And how do you decide between what to hand to an agent, what to hand to a person is really just, does it work, right? It's like a very simple decision matrix right now is like, does it work? And moving forward, when they get even better, it's like, does it work well enough for me to do this without having to like give myself more, right? So like when the tipping point happened with coding agents was when people realized that the outputs were good enough to trust them before writing it themselves. And so that's what changed with coding agents, and that will just change with every other task, right? So if I'm writing an article and an agent writes it and it's bad, and then 6 months later, I try a new agent and it works, I'm going to have the agent go first every time. And then eventually you stop needing to review it, which hasn't happened yet for like any task, basically. But it will in the next 12 months, where you don't have to review anything at all. You just merge it, or you just send the blog post, or you send the email, and you just have it work. That's how you make the decision on what to give to an agent. And so right now that looks like you start with coding, you see if it works. You start with writing, you see if it works. Depends on the writing. Anything internet search related can probably be done like this now. A lot of, I haven't dropped a lot of emails. I have a co-founder dropped a lot of emails for me, calendar invites, but then like higher level things, which is like, go hire me a candidate. We're still more than 12 months out, probably 24 months out from something like that, right? It's just not there yet.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And this is a little bit more philosophical, but in a world where agents can do so much, what is the core value of human work?
The best way to think about this is to look at a business top down. Let's say agents do all of the IC work in a company, right? So all of the individual contributions, everything from code to marketing to whatever. This happens at companies, right? You just replace the agents with people. And so you have people doing this work, and then above them, someone reviewing their work, right? And so that's what we're moving towards. You can see this with code, right? Everyone's now just reviewing their agent's code and accepting or telling them to do it differently. But then what do the people who manage those people do? And that's the question of what happens next, right? Those people are still reviewers, but they're reviewers of a much higher level. They're like, everything goes up one level abstraction wise. And this whole like bottom up is going to move so quickly. And we've seen it in the last 12 months with coding agents, right? Where you go from writing everything yourself to reviewing everything and not writing anything yourself. And then we're going to go to, now you're reviewing features that the agent makes, entire features instead of files. And at some point, you're going to be reviewing entire apps that the agent creates. And so what does it look like for everything else? Well, you're going to go from, let's say, marketing, you're going from reviewing an individual Instagram post or an individual, blog post to you're reviewing a specific marketing campaign. And you still need the taste, right? Everything across the board, you still need a taste. Taste is becoming the biggest moat ever. And certain people have it and certain people don't. And, you can see a business that has one and doesn't. And you're going to start seeing this even more because the higher level abstractions, all they require is taste. So if you want to know what a good marketing campaign is versus a bad marketing campaign, it's just taste. Good app, bad app, taste, right? Everything across the board becomes based on that. And let's look at 5 years from now, what happens next? Well, you're up to almost the entire top level of a business, which is where we're going. And then this is why, we started the company was you're going to have a CEO type figure running the business and basically setting taste and direction and vision for the company. And then almost all of the details will be handled below that. And so like the day-to-day of a CEO of an agentic company looks like you have this system, probably co-founder, the system that handles all these details. And then they bring and surface decisions and reports, and you read them and you see what goes on. You see, a marketing report or like a new app launch report or something like that. And then you make a decision based on the report, or you don't do anything and you wait until the next one. And that's kind of what your day-to-day looks like, is you're just choosing these different things. And you're just, this is exactly how like a CEO of a Fortune 500 works, right? They have all these departments, they have like 20 direct reports, and then 20 direct reports bring them something, say, look, this just happened. What should we do? And then this just happened. What should we do? And that's what your day looks like. And that's what people's work is going to look like in the future. And then, part of our belief is that when it looks like that, you have time to live your life better. And all of our marketing copy and everything like that, and our whole brand image is like, it's actually based on a real belief of you can go and spend time with your friends. You can go to a park during the day. You can get a dog in New York City. All of these things are not possible right now because we don't have any time. But in the future, in like 5 years, everyone could have their own thing going and have all the time in the world.
That's so good. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, that was great. Um, you mentioned taste as being something that's a future-proof skill. What other things, maybe related to taste or maybe not, do you see as being future-proof?
So I like to do this thing where I don't do Zoom meetings for like when we were fundraising, we didn't do any Zoom meetings. I did in-person meetings and I just wanted to talk to people. And I think anything that hinges on something like that will be future-proofed. So sales in the highest level does not involve email campaigns. It doesn't involve drip campaigns. It doesn't involve, a demo to another demo to an XYZ, right? It's really just a person in a room talking to another person. Anything related to that will probably stick around. We've like noticed this shift from, you went from, before the internet, it was all these in-person meetings and schmoozing and whining and dining. And now it's super, sales cycle, drip campaigns, UGC, shit like that. It's going to go back, right? Because like, if you know that everyone you're doing a Zoom call with is using Cluely, then it's going to go back to, okay, we'll show up in person, take your glasses off at the door, all of this kind of stuff. And then that's how sales will be done. But it's yet to be discovered all of the jobs people will actually do. I listen to a lot of and read a lot of very smart writing from very smart people at the top of this industry. And I'm telling you, none of them know what people are going to do for work in 10 years. And like if you see people interviewing Sam or Dario or something, and they're like, oh, well, you say these jobs are going to go away. He gives you some BS answer. So does Dario.
Deflect.
Total deflect. I actually don't know if like a lot of the work that we're doing these days is going to matter anymore later. And I have no idea what the economy looks like or any of that. I did see a tweet that looked interesting, which is like, UBI is just the useless email jobs that are given to people that make $250K a year. That might be true, right? Like if you look at what everyone at Apple has been doing, that's basically it. And maybe all the companies in the future look like that. I don't know. I think a lot of the really smart people in the world also don't know. So I want to append that to my answer because even though I think taste matters a lot, even though I think like being able to make and sort of orchestrate these products, and then, being able to sell something and sell stories. Even if you have all those three things, we still might not have any work to do.
Or maybe it'll look like a scene out of Severance. You're just sitting
And
at
maybe
our
it'll
computers, sorting arbitrary things.
Yeah. I mean, I think like prototyping engineers are always going to have work, right? Because like, if you can make something cool, then that's honestly a job in and of itself. And engineers will just get faster. But, engineers at big tech companies, for example, that work on internal tooling, I don't know, and that's like half of them.
But even to that point, the prototyping engineers that will ultimately get hired are the ones with the best taste, right? That's ultimately going to be like the criteria that they're selected based on.
Yeah. I think that there's a big world of like making new stuff faster. We're already seeing it with code, and like my engineers, right? Their job is 2 years ago might have been writing unit tests and writing all these random React components, but now it's like screw around with the feature for 30 minutes, make the feature in 5, screw around for 25 minutes, see if it works. Like that's really what it's turned into, and it's going to keep looking like that. It will just be much faster. The question is, what happens when it takes like a minute? Like, what do you do the rest of the day? When that whole question becomes a minute, like, do you make 50 versions instead of 20? Do you make 500 over the course of a week? Like that, at some point that doesn't Like at some point there is a version of the feature that's done. I mean, you can't just make any more variations of it, right? And you can only do so much to a single piece of software. And so like, there's this question of like, okay, well, even if you do that, you do it at a super high level. I mean, do we just go to Mars? Like, who knows, right? I think it's actually a very unanswered question. I think that's one of the biggest secrets of the industry is that nobody's actually given a solid answer to this question of what we're going to work on in 10 years.
Yeah, whenever that question comes up, I remind myself of, I was born in a small village in Pakistan, and just as a brief aside, it's a tiny agrarian village, and people there are generally quite happy, not super stressed out. They're barely scraping by for the most part, but generally they're happy, and a lot of them work. They work on the farm, but a lot of them don't work. They spend all day socializing, walking around to different people's houses, spending time with them. And again, I think I don't know. I feel like there's maybe a version of the world where we get over this need to work all the time, which I'm definitely susceptible to. Most people that are running companies are susceptible to. And we start to just want to spend time socializing, spend time with other humans, and be okay with that.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you know, you know what New York looks like in like May, right? I don't want to work in May. Like, I want to go and drink Aperol spritz with my friends and, on the street. And everyone deep down wants to do that, right? Even the ones who work the hardest, right? Even Elon Musk deep down wants to like go and drink Aperol spritz with his friends.
In Mars.
But I think we will get there, and I'm very optimistic that it will look good, and there will be a really good world that we end up in where you can work when you want to, and you can make cool stuff, make as much cool stuff as you want. I am a little nervous about the transition. I don't know. Getting from here to there is going to be really wild.
Yeah, it might be a little bit bumpy. Yeah, it definitely seems that way. So I know we're running on time here, Andrew. So a couple more questions. One is, you've described the work culture at your company a little bit. Are there any other cultural quirks, maybe around habits, decision making, communication, that you want to call out that might be generalized to like an AI native startup? I know one thing was no limits on AI use. I think I read that somewhere. So you don't place any limits there. Anything else, or if you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I do want to elaborate on the no limits thing because I think it's really important. I will see an engineer who makes 300,000 in base salary at some company talk about how they're limited to spending like $100 a month on Cursor. And it's just wild to me. This exists at like every company outside of the AI space. Like you're not one of these, recent companies. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, we have engineers. Let's say they're New York engineers. Let's say they make like 200 to something K. That's a really large amount of money every month. And so, yeah, when we say unlimited AI usage, we mean unlimited. Our Cursor bill for a 3-person engineering team was $6,000 last month. And yeah, and my only question is like, how can we make it higher? Because what I want to do is I want velocity, and I would rather push velocity. And like with AI, you can push velocity really, really hard. And you can push this like prototyping sort of mindset. One of the things that I think is really big about a new AI native company is to let your engineers experiment a little bit, right? So like there's an old saying which is like, if you don't give engineers good problems, they create problems. And this is very true. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen like 4 or 5 engineers talking to each other, but they really need stimulation very fast. And so one of the things that you got to do is like, give them a problem. Don't tell them a solution, right? Give them a problem. Say, hey, we need to make our agent like 10% faster. can you figure out how to do that instead of being like, oh, we need to do, this thing to our database and this thing to our front end, the senior wagon. Like, you just have to letting them work at a very high velocity also just means giving a little bit of control, away to that. And I think it's a really, really big change from how things used to be, because when you were working with engineers like 2 years ago, making a single component, like a dropdown, would take a day, an entire day to make a dropdown, right? And then making a good dropdown would take a week. Literally, it was just hours and hours of doing this stuff. And so you kind of had to be a little micro-y. But now you can have people try stuff at a much higher rate, and buying into that, literally leaning in, is a mindset you have to have.
Love that. So what's next for General Intelligence Company and for this idea of agentic companies?
So we are currently hiring. If any of those things that I said sound interesting to someone watching right now, come apply. But yeah, we are expanding the team very quickly. We're working towards these super optimizers that I talked about. So we have early versions of this system. And they look a little bit combined, and they're like, first versions. But we're making these into real systems that will work on an entire department level. We'll probably have them done in like 6 months. And then we take that to the world. And then eventually we scale that up to a company, right? And then, who knows what happens next. That's what's next for us. It's super exciting. And you get to live your life in New York. It's great.
Awesome. We'll be sure to link to the careers page in the show notes. And Andrew, anything else you want to share or plug? Where can people find you?
So people can find me on Twitter. Just look up Andrew Pignanelli on Twitter. GeneralIntelligenceCompany.com, cofounder.co. That's how you can find us. And everything you need will be there. I think if people are interested in diving further, they should definitely read our blog. Our blog goes into pretty hard detail on this stuff. And, we have this vision, but we've broken it down into very digestible pieces, and we actually think we can do it. And so that's probably the last thing I'll plug. I also wanted to thank you for having me on today. This is fun.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Really enjoy the conversation. AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.